My guest today is Jay Samit. I got to know Jay while he was head of licensing and digital for EMI, which was one of the first major global music companies. And I later asked him to join the board of Loudeye, where I was the chairman. And I knew Jay would be a great Zero to Proof guest. Jay has spent his career at the forefront of multiple waves of disruption, spanning video games, digital media, music, and technology, often stepping in at moments when entire industries were being forced to change. His early work in special effects and video games were at companies that he founded at a very young age. He ended up in senior roles at companies like EMI, Sony, Universal, and later Deloitte. He has consistently operated at the intersection of creativity, technology, and transformation. And he's helped shape these major evolutions and worked alongside some of the most influential leaders and companies of the past few decades. What I love about Jay is not just where he's been, but how he thinks. He doesn't look for opportunities in the traditional sense. He looks for problems to solve and then builds from there. In this conversation, we talk about that mindset. We discuss why perseverance matters more than initial skill, how identifying pain points drives innovation, and what it really takes to operate inside both startups and large organizations during periods of great change. We also get into his work as an author, which came later in his life, including his book, Disrupt You, and his latest book, The Second Act Advantage, which focuses on how people can reinvent themselves later in life by leveraging the experience, networks, and even new technologies like AI. This is a conversation about reinvention, curiosity, and how to continuously build a life and a career around solving meaningful problems. Welcome, Jay. Jay, you and I have known each other about 25 years. You were at EMI and very early days of digital music, and I was at Loudeye, and I was the exec chairman of Loudeye, where Loudeye was attempting to build the business to business back end for digital media before iTunes basically took over the world. We stayed in touch off and on over the time. You've had a remarkable, amazing career, super interesting at the intersection of, a fascinating connection that most people don't have, and most people don't really, I think, get to look at the world the way you do. So I've always found you both, interesting, just a great guy, and with a fascinating perspective. So with that, welcome. And, I'd love to have you kind of talk about the life of Jay.
Jay really didn't set out to be an entrepreneur, didn't set out to be anything that made sense. I knew what I didn't want to do in life. I bought into the go to college, get good grades, and live happily ever after. And I got out of school and no one was hiring. Completely unprepared, didn't know what a resume was. I mean, literally nothing. No one in my family had ever worked in an office or a building or, any that I could relate or point to. Coincidentally, during those years, for those that are way younger, there was a movie came out that kind of changed my world, was Star Wars. I'm like, oh my God, this was the greatest thing I ever saw. I want to do Hollywood special effects. That's what I want to do. I knew no one in Hollywood. I didn't know anything about special effects. Didn't know anything. And I guess either it's youth or I wasn't hugged or something about me. I just believe in anything, I can figure it out. So I needed data. That's today's grown-up word. But I said, well, what are they looking for to get one of these jobs? So I ran what's called a blind ad in the trades in Hollywood Reporter and Variety, describing an entry-level job for an effects company. And that gave me a bunch of resumes, which told me two things: what my resume should look like and where there were companies where somebody had one foot out the door.
But just pause for a minute. You figured out the idea of, hey, look, I'm going to place an ad so that the kind of people I want to be are going to apply for a position in order for me to learn. That's a pretty creative thing.
The throughput is, and I thank you for the compliment, I thought everybody saw the world I did. Thank heavens they don't, or there'd be no job for me. So I did that. And then I realized that everybody was trying to start effects and do effects, and Star Wars changed budgets and changed Hollywood and changed everybody. I mean, there was only like one or two blockbusters ever before, Jaws. So this was the era of Spielberg and Lucas, and great, great film. So I said, you know what? I'll start a special effects company. I do not have to know anything about special effects, but I knew no one's going to trust a feature film on a 21-year-old kid. So I printed business cards. My first company was called Jasmine, J. Allen Samit, and it's mine. No one ever picked up on that. But I didn't make myself president or CEO of the company. I just made myself a sales guy. So I could go out and talk to people, get the work, and there's some adults in charge. And what I realized is most people just wanted a job. So you could hire. So my first epiphany was was you only need two things to be successful in business: insight and perseverance. Insight can be learned and honed, but perseverance, you need some either intrinsic or extrinsic motivational force. So I had two sons when I was very young. I wanted them to have a better life. So every time I should have given up, I didn't know about raising capital. I didn't know what a VC was. I didn't know anything. I knew I had credit cards, and you can get in a lot of trouble real fast because back then they mailed you a dozen of them. Made every mistake imaginable, but you fail forward. Each time, if you don't earn, you at least learn. And so I got a scholarship to UCLA because I test really well on those little oval things, okay? So they put me in a room with another kid, which I didn't find out till recently when it came to book signing after all these years, because he always hid it. He was only 15 when he went to college, right? He didn't want anybody to know that. I'm like, this guy's super nerd. He moved to college with one pair of pants and 2 t-shirts. But we had a terminal in our dorm in 1978 to the internet. That was my exposure to technology. That was my exposure to what you could do. So I don't know when you started on a computer. I'm sure it's for a much more serious and auspicious reason. Mine was they were hooking up the different UC campuses in Los Alamos so scientists could make bombs, okay? He would have to go to the bathroom, get food, do this or that. I would take over and I would just type jokes to the kid at the other end, right? It's a half a century later, pretty much describes the greatest use of this technology. It's the human connection. That's what got me into it, and that got me to start in effects and not be afraid of stuff. We actually won a Clio, like the Oscar for ads. There was an ad, a huge budget. I'm starving. I got 2 little kids, right? My credit cards are full. There was an ad going around that wanted computer graphics. There were no computer graphics back then. You know, when Princess Leia does the computer thing, that was all traditional animation. But anyway, big computer graphics budget. I say yes, we get the deal. There's no computer graphics, but I got animators that could do stuff that looked like what people thought computer graphics were. Client was happy. We get paid. Client, ad agency, submitted for a Clio, and they won an award for first computer graphics in a commercial. So you just do it. You figure it out. And probably along that time, I met an old codger who gave me the best advice that I still is the core of all my books and all my teaching. You either have to be the best in the world at what you do, and that's really hard.
Really hard, yeah.
Or be the only one doing it, because then by definition, you're the best. So I was always doing the next thing. Now, the way I looked at it, if I'm making video games and no one else is making video games, that was my first company, there's nobody to say you're doing it wrong or it should be this way. I mean, you're figuring it out. I mean, the guy that figured out the moving background, that was genius, never occurred to us. There were real smart people doing it. But in the beginning, you have no competition and you do your best and you have to market yourself. And then there is that moment that either you learn to scale when everybody comes into the place that you discovered, you know, you put the first flag on the new soil. And then all of a sudden when the Spanish Armada comes, for the most part of my career, became the blackjack dealer. Like, I'm out of here, on to the next new thing. And there was a moment when Microsoft announced they were going to get into video games and they were going to spend $100 million that year. And at that year, my little itty bitty company had 7 of the top 10 best-selling games. And I'm like, it's over. Now, what I didn't understand is people offered to buy my company and trade stock and this or that. And I had no one to turn to for advice. When you're down moments, you're haunted by the billions. And it took one of my sons to say, Dad, you wouldn't have held it on to all those years to own a third of Activision or this or that, you know, and that got me to calm down, but made every mistake. But you go on and you do the next thing.
It's interesting because you talked about perseverance, and what you're talking about here is something you and I talked about before, and you've talked about it in 2 or 3 things here, is windows of opportunity that don't stay open forever. And, you know, whether you're the only, you're among the only. What have you learned about picking those? Because you that seems to be a theme.
When there's nothing out there, anything you pick is better than nothing. So when I started my company, I had 2 ideas. The PC, we were an IBM developer and they sent us the thing and, you know, all that type of stuff. And I came up with 2 ideas for products. One was I hated when you had to edit any piece of video to make anything. Post-production suite was like tens of thousands of dollars an hour, all this equipment. If we could edit video on a computer, that would save a ton of money. Maybe not to do movies, but industrials, whatever. Or IBM couldn't get me the documentation for my guys to figure out how to code and do what they needed. So they had to FedEx boxes of printouts of stuff. So I came up with this idea for a product called Digital Mailman. I type something on my computer and you get it on your computer. That didn't seem like a big opportunity as the other. So we didn't focus on email. So there were always bigger opportunities.
Before you jump off of that, there's something about how you look at the world where you're seeing opportunities you're seeing gaps. What you described, there are gaps or missing. And then so sometimes people see those and they go, oh, but the difference between having an idea and an observation and doing something.
I'd use a different word. I don't see gaps. I also don't see opportunities. I see obstacles. I see pain points. Entrepreneurs, in my opinion, do not sell things, they solve things. No one ever went into a hardware store to buy a 1/4-inch drill bit. What they wanted was the 1/4-inch hole. The drill bit solved that. So in my life, I couldn't afford to edit in these edit suites. Now I could do it on a desktop. It might just be, rough cuts, but even that would be what was called offline to save money. What are the pain points? So the greater I'm exposed to the universe, the more pain points I could see. So my very first technology that made me any money was the Laserdisc. Remember those?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
IBM, Universal Studios, and Pioneer Electronics in Japan, a joint venture, spent untold money to make this thing that no one wanted.
Yeah. It never took off, but it was there.
It never took off with consumers, and that's all they focused on. I said, wait a second. If you can jump from one point to anything else, if you can do still frames, what can this do in the business world? So in the old days, if you went to a stock photo house, I need some golfers for an ad, they would mail FedEx you slides, and then you pick your ones, it would take you days. I said, what if I put a whole stock library on a disc? And then you call
because those were all analog. I mean, those were just a series of analog.
I want shots 72,400. So I did that as a product. Then I realized video is linear. Watch the whole hour thing. If you want to teach somebody a course, you want to be able to zig and zag. Very simple. So I did that. Then I said, wait a second. And again, pain points. If you lived in a place and you owned your house, you had cable, you could watch MTV, and music videos were the center point of culture. If you didn't, if you were in an apartment back then, you couldn't get cable. So I remember jukeboxes are in bars. You listen to music, you put your 50 cents in. Why not make a video jukebox? Put a bunch of Laserdisc players in there. And my old expression that everybody that works for me wants to choke me, how hard can it be, right? So we did those. And so in each time, and the one where I think I met you before we were on that board together is fast forward. We're now making games. We're now making CD-ROMs. It's basically Laserdiscs that fit in your pocket. And somebody else invented the sound card. So games didn't have to be just beep, 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 boop, beep, beep. This is the MTV era. What if you had a game that had real rock and roll music? And so we made a puzzle game, similar to those slider things where you put the 1 through 16 and you try to...
Yeah.
With moving videos, and you had to put the video together before the music video stopped. And there were different levels of difficulty by number of pieces. And I go, this is fun. The game's proven people love doing slider puzzles. People love music videos. I just have to get the biggest bands in the world.
Just that. At some point, you transitioned out of Jay's own businesses to working for big companies.
This was the transition point. So I had been a Microsoft developer like everybody else, our company. So I sent a letter to Bill Gates, who I'd never met and knew nobody in the C-suite. I was not important. Nothing. A bunch of guys sitting in a room, not asking for a favor, but saying, this game will make PC games more popular. Would you, the richest man in the world, send a letter, can't be an email because he doesn't have a computer, to David Geffen, the richest man in the music industry, telling him to take a meeting with me? The word for that is chutzpah. But if he says no, I've lost nothing. He did it. I went to David Geffen. And then David is a god. If people don't know, the whole California sound, the Eagles, Linda Ronstadt, everything. First billionaire in music. And I wanted this game to have the best music. And so here, little me is saying, you don't have enough artists. I want artists from everywhere. And I'll give you 50% ownership of this game for no money. Then the trajectory suddenly goes like the hockey stick and the big companies want you. Sell my company. Now I have to build a games division for Universal. And then the music industry goes sideways. There's no other digital person that they knew about in content land down here. And I went to EMI and I got to work for probably the first only mentor I ever got in my career, Richard Branson's original partner. So he understood working with crazy creatives.
Was that Alon or
no, Ken Berry?
Ken Berry. Okay. Talk about the transition from little to big and just talk a little bit about that, because a lot of the things that you honed that were critical as an individual entrepreneur that don't apply so well in a big world.
They don't apply for the existing big world.
Yeah, okay.
I've never held a job that someone else has already held. Back to that, be the best at what you are. Any job that there's an ad for, any job in an organization, there's somebody better qualified, better educated, better looking, better connected. I hate that person, okay? But every time there's this inflection point where companies and the music industry was literally laying off people and going out of business. There's no pride in the fact that no one ever called me in my entire career when they're having their best year and said, hey, Jay, join us, make it better. It's when they've got a problem and they've turned over all the other cards. I didn't know that big companies didn't encourage innovation, breaking rules, getting stuff done, going ahead, asking for forgiveness. And so we'll jump ahead at Sony, a giant old-fashioned company when I was brought in very close to the top. I didn't know that the lawyer assigned to my division was keeping tabs on every corporate policy rule, everything I'm breaking, and brought it to the chief general counsel. And so I get called to the chief general counsel and I look up and never met her. Very impressive woman. She was Ollie North's personal attorney. She was President Clinton's attorney. This is the connect person. And her husband, more importantly, was in charge of a federal division that during the music days, we got in for antitrust violations and price fix. We got called before and I had to testify in court. And I'm like, I'm dead. My career is over, right? I don't follow rules. And I went into Nicole's office, terrified, and obviously top floor, the big office, Manhattan, you're at the sky. And she goes, Jay, see that stack over there? And her desk is like, she's killed more trees than exist. That's everybody that's suing us, every problem I have. You're making us money. Keep doing what you're doing. How can we help, right? At a certain level, the rules go away. I can't function and run General Motors and get 2% improvement. I'm not an engineer that's looking at how do we incrementally make something better. I'm a blank slate person. And so the music industry, I had no clue how to fix the music industry. But in talking to everybody, thousands of people, including your company, had ideas. Who am I to say which is a good idea and which is a bad idea? That would be egotistical. What I can do is say, listen, I have to pay the bills here. If you already raised a bunch of money, pay for a license, we'll give you all the music you want. If you don't have any money, I still want you to succeed. I'll give you a license, you'll give me some equity. You become successful, we make money. But either way, what I'm doing is basically the X Prize. We'll help everybody fight for this giant pie. And so even the Napster guys came in, but they then left with the ego of, we'll crush all you guys and we'll still be standing and you'll all be gone. The other side, which goes back to my roots of breaking rules, there was a reason why the music industry didn't license music to any of these companies. They didn't own the rights. They owned the masters, but to uncouple an album, you had to get sign off from the artist. And given that 99% of successful artists felt like they got cheated by their label, if you ask them for anything, their answer is, I made this decision, which hopefully the statute of limitations is over. Give me a list of everybody that ever sued or audited the label. That was 98 groups. You've heard of all of them. Beatles, Rolling Stones, Garth Brooks, Beach Boys, Frank Sinatra. Everybody else, I'm putting in all these deals. If they get royalty checks, they're not going to complain. If their heirs are getting royalty checks, they're not going to complain. That's enough content. And then I spent 2 years sitting down with every famous artist because it was cool to get to meet your heroes, but their managers, their lawyers, their teams, explaining them, here's how much stuff of yours was stolen today. I'm not here to negotiate. You negotiate with somebody else. I just want music. I'm a fan. I want music to survive. And I got that list down to 5 acts that I couldn't convince. And one of them was my ultimate hero, the Beatles, which they turned down. I can't say the company, but they turned down $100 million. And in the same meeting, licensed Yellow Submarine to be on a Schwinn bicycle for $50,000.
Yeah, it was an interesting time, but having been through that as well, it's hard to look back, and remember that people were against digital distribution of music, everything we talk about in streaming.
Tell you another one. None of the music companies would let Amazon sell CDs because that would hurt retail. Whether you want to call it a formal blockade or, whatever, I don't want to get the antitrust issues. Every industry violates antitrust is what I've learned. I said, wait a second, here's somebody that wants to buy full wholesale, no co-op advertising, no store placement fees, and everything that was in Tower Records around the world, every record store was 100% consignment. If it didn't sell after 5 years in their shelves, they have the right to send it back. I'm giving this guy, Jeff, whatever he wants.
It's interesting, the theme, because I want to make sure that the theme comes out here is something you said is you never had a job that somebody else had before you. And what you gravitated towards, and we've talked about this, is the problems which translated into opportunities. So when they were trying to figure out what to do about digital, there you were. That theme that ran through the earlier part of your life also came along when you went into the bigger companies. Okay. The need didn't change. And so you found that niche, which is keep doing it, Jay. I don't care as much about your breaking the rules, but somebody has to go out there and do that. And the person that had to go do that had to have their curiosity, had to overcome their fear. You had to be less worried about the consequences, because in an organization, and maybe you wouldn't use those words, in an organization, especially organizations that get larger, many people are trying to avoid risk. So the person that wants to take the opportunity like you took, that's a risky thing. So your willingness to take risks gave you a lot of opportunity.
I never wanted to be at those places. I never wanted a job. And so if I couldn't do and make something happen, fire me. So yeah, the most impactful book I ever read, and why I read this in high school, I don't know, was The Peter Principle. Everybody will rise to their level of incompetence. This was bizarre to me when I thought all adults were really good. And so it was basically, if you're not familiar for the listeners, if a teacher's great with kids, a great teacher, they make her principal, so she has to deal with bureaucracy of running a thing and parents. Well, that's a different skill. If they're lousy at that, they stay principal forever. If they're really good at that, they move them to school board and have to deal with politics and all kinds of stuff. If they suck at that, they're school. So most people have a imposter syndrome because they're not competent at where they got stuck. So they're always afraid of losing their job. So all that I have to do is show them that whatever I'm offering secures them. And that took me years to learn. I used to walk in with a great solution for Coke or Pepsi or whoever, talk my way into meeting with very senior people. And I come in with all the solutions of why this is great for the company. Nobody on the other side really cares. They want to know, how's it good for them, the individual? Will make them look good to their boss. They say no, and their boss finds out they said no, and the competition said yes. Will they lose their job? So it's back to your fear. So you absolutely identified that culture. I'm a square peg. I'm not smarter. I'm not just Steve Jobs outsmarted me on 3 different negotiations. Man, nobody's written about his negotiation style and thought process, which is a whole nother planet. There are no rules. No rules, okay? He should have run CIA. So anyway, I'm now later launching a competitor to iTunes. iTunes' marketing budget is $100 million a year. Their commercials are awesome. They have the best ad agency in the world. They don't talk about anything. They don't even talk about iTunes. They just show you white earbuds and beautiful colors. Sony told you battery stats and charging and my budget, I have zero marketing budget because the hardware guys don't want to give me any of their budget. So now how do I launch and compete? It's the same going back to my roots. I need somebody stronger and bigger that can fight for me. So look in the news, who's in trouble? And so I had 2 things jumped out at me at that moment. One was a guy named Spurlock did Supersize Me, a movie where he ate nothing but McDonald's for a month and nearly dies. For the first time in McDonald's history, sales were down. They're in trouble. Franchisees are not happy. What's that have to do with launching an iTunes competitor? Okay. My thing was called Sony Connect. I can make McDonald's hip again. Buy a Big Mac, get a free track. Give digital downloads with every burger purchase. Okay? You have the ad guys that can make a better ad than I ever could, and they make gorgeous commercial. Okay? Da-da-da-da. But I also knew, as a dad who eats junk food, I want the tray liners. I want to be on the cups. I want to be in the windows. First week, they delivered 20 million paying customers to my website. I did the same thing with United Airlines. They were in bankruptcy. Nobody was flying with them. They thought that if they booked, they might not make it out. They told me they were coming out of bankruptcy. I said, I'll give you the greatest publicity. And so my other thing is, you don't have to have an original idea. I'm not smart enough for that either. But I keep in my pocket every great idea I ever saw that nobody else saw. So Richard Branson, when he launched Virgin, wanted to do a concert in the sky because he came from the music and he could get any band. And it was against FAA rules to have music played in an instrument on a plane. Story for another time. But I knew
I never heard that.
MGM had a piano bar upstairs in their 747s, so nobody could compete with that. They were small enough, MGM Air, that they powers that be from the big airlines killed it. So anyway, so I knew United could change the rules. So I said, let's do a concert in the sky, fill a plane in Chicago, where their headquarters are, with all the national press, TV crews, everything. Sheryl Crow performs. The front of the plane is people on Sony Vio's editing, and everybody leaves with a DVD, make the evening news, make everything, da-da-da-da-da. They painted the plane as a surprise. Total cost of that was Cheryl's rider required that there's a pizza when she gets done. I'm like, that's my girl. Like, I love pizza. Anyway, so that video played on every United flight for a month. And then I handed that concept to my team and just to rinse and repeat. Who else can we do a tie-in? Mannequins at American Eagle, all wearing Sony Walkmans, and give them a free song. We replicated it 200 times. So there's always a solution. And that's the other advantage. Every startup person is great at marketing, is they never had the budget to market like somebody who was only schooled at a big company. How do you do guerrilla things that get the same results?
Well, you did. And then somewhere along the line, you decided to write books because you've got so many super interesting stories. And I want to make sure we get to the book that you're about to launch too.
So my kids were my motivation for not giving up. I wouldn't have learned all this stuff if I didn't have them. I would just have failed. I couldn't. My kids now grow up, they're successful, they're doing great, they're unbelievable. I could do a whole show bragging, but they didn't need me. I mean, they need me in that sense, but if I didn't make another dime, they don't need a penny. I didn't want any more money. I'm not money motivated, never was. Okay. To do another startup, take another company public, report to another board, shoot me. I was kind of lost and I said, wait a second, there's more problems out there. No one's explaining the way I see how you do this. There's the MBA approach, and God bless them. I decided I was going to teach this at USC, which is the largest engineering school in the country. And I taught how to build a high-tech startup. Students did amazing. They made a lot of money while they were still students and donated to the school. And I was enjoying that, did that for almost a decade. But I had this one student who was the smartest engineer I'd ever seen, brilliant guy. And when it came to coming up with the business idea, which was the class assignment for him to do, dumb as a ton of bricks. It wasn't connecting. So somebody told me, when you write a book, picture that one person, not a demographic, that one human being. So I wrote the book with him in mind. It was called Disrupt You, and my life changed. I did it to pay it forward to help others. I didn't expect it would go global. I didn't expect it would be in Lithuanian and Chinese. And I'd hear from people in Pakistan and Ethiopia and 100 countries that it changed their life. I didn't do the work. I can't take the credit. I just showed a path that nobody else was thinking about. And that was my one and done. Not doing another book. Yeah. Okay. And then I got emails that I call love letters, people thanking me. And I got this one from millennial. I could never do it. And I have thin skin. I'm like, why am I not able to reach them? Right. 100 people can say you like me, but one person says, no. So I said, maybe I don't speak millennial. So I came up with a challenge. I'd like to compete with myself. Could I take a homeless immigrant and mentor him one day a week for a year, give him no cash, no business training, no contacts, has to start a zero cash business. And spoiler alert, if you're reading Future Proofing You, goes from homeless to millionaire in under a year. And the amazing part of the story is midway through the year, his business was an online business. Google changed the algorithms. They changed all the rules. Business was dead. Over. It's done. And I'm like, so a guy makes $500,000. That's an interesting book. I'll calm him down at our weekly meeting. And he comes in. This is a guy who's never seen success. Jay, did you hear what happened? So here's how I had to pivot. I did this. I changed that. I didn't miss any revenues for this week, but I got 3 new ideas to take us to the next level. I couldn't believe it. And then fast forward to the second act advantage. Our world is rapidly changing, faster than all these changes that I've seen. And I do believe 10, 20% of jobs will disappear. Maybe they'll come back at another time, but that's not going to help the masses that are displaced. And non-native digital generation, the boomers, still haven't embraced all the tools. And yet you have an advantage in your second act, whether you got laid off, whether you're retiring, whatever caused it, that you now have all the things that I didn't have. You have a network. You have wisdom and experience. You now have AI, so you don't have to raise the same amount of capital, and you buy all the same tools and hire all the people, and you can solve things on a global scale instantly. So we need to solve more problems. We don't need to take the most experienced people and push them aside. Not to mention, you have a 53% chance of dying younger if you retire than if you keep working and have a purpose and are engaged. And so I decided to throw my hat in again and try to help.
The theme that runs through those 3 books is empowering people. That if you look at what you're doing in all of those, the story arc is really about essentially people finding a different path to their own future. And the first one, it's interesting because the disrupt you, the more broad one, the one that you described, it's interesting that, didn't resonate. The first one didn't resonate with young people. The second one was aimed at young people. The third one is aimed at, older people. Your point about the second act is to some degree the problem you described, is life expectancy of people who retire. The opportunity of that, though, is you have all these great things you may not notice, like you said, and you're not done.
Yeah. And the story, so if you make it to 60, you got a pretty good chance you're going to make it to 90. And if you talk to David Sinclair at Harvard or any of these people that'll live to 150 are already a lot. Okay. So your second act's going to be longer than your first career. You won't have all the bouncing around and I'll never do that job again thing. And now you can focus. Yeah. If you need money, focus on money, but you can also focus on purpose. And I truly believe the purpose of life is to live a life of purpose. So what injustice did you see that you didn't deal with because you're busy raising your family or this or that you can now correct? So some of the stories in Second Act Advantage are people that solved amazing problems that were important to them at scale, or they took their very specific knowledge and made a course that suddenly thousands or millions take. Or this is one woman, Joan McDonald, 71-year-old woman, arthritis, acid reflux, overweight. You got the picture, lethargic. Her daughter talks her into just start exercising, just start somewhere. And she decides as a guilt to do it, she would start exercising publicly on Instagram. Just turned 80. She is ripped like Schwarzenegger. I can't exaggerate this. She has 2-point-something million followers. She's making more money than she ever made in her career just helping others. And that's the message.
That's such a great theme.
I feel guilty for my role in social media because now it's been weaponized to make money off of separating us and angering us when we can take AI as an individual and heal society and connect people. That's my purpose that's guiding me. How can I can't solve everything, but I can teach others. And so now I feel like I'm adding value.
Well, and you are. And one of the reasons I wanted to have you on, we talked about this a little bit, is you haven't spent your life going through life looking for what's in it for Jay. You've focused on every one of the things you talked about. You were creating value in one form or another. And yeah, you got to participate in that. But at these transitional moments along the way, you both saw problems and saw opportunities. And so you built interesting things.
And I don't want to sound I was a saint. The part most interesting to me is there is a certain ego that says, I can do that.
And
because
you don't give up. I mean, and your books talk about people taking that stand and doing things that matter to them and making a difference. And, when you and I started talking about your book, which is coming out like really soon, it's brilliant. And, there's so much resonance of this ongoing thing about persevering. So it's not just persevering in a particular challenge, it's persevering in your life writ large, and that's what I love. That's what I love about your book.
By the way, one of the things in this book that I went to AI when I was done and said, what's missing? And one of the AIs had a real good insight that is when you're gone for that second act, your spouse and family may have other plans for you in their minds. Oh, Papa Jay's going to babysit every day, or why do you want to go to school or whatever? So the emotional thing, gray divorce is all other divorce rates are going down in the US. Gray divorce is going through the roof. Neither person had a plan. You've been apart for 80 hours a week for your entire marriages. And now you stare at each other for 50 years and go, what do you want for dinner? I don't know. What do you want for dinner? So dealing with the emotional part and the sandwich generation, many of us have parents that are in their 90s or 100. Majority of college graduates aren't getting a job. So you're having to take care of both sides. So this isn't retirement of the 20th century. And I was shocked that there was, again, a need that I saw. And I looked around and here's your bucket list. Go see, the pyramids, or here's how you can clip coupons and live cheaper. Not how do you live more richly, even if you want to live on less money. So I thank you for sharing this time. Take it easy, everybody.